So you should have two handouts in your seat. If you don't, just move forward into a spot where there are some. And if you're still stuck, then you're still stuck. But no, we have more. We'll help you sort it out. So welcome to Exploring and Encountering Genesis. Are you in the right class? Is that where you wanted to be? Yes. If you're not in the right class, go ahead and migrate to one of the other classes. But hopefully, we have the teens with us in this class tonight. So I'm fired up about that. All right. This is a new class, and you don't have pens. How are you going to write if you don't have pens? But I have pens for you. And so what it means is you need to be writing on your piece of paper and not texting on your phone or checking the Rocky score or, whatever. So can a couple of the team brothers come up and hand these out? Right here. Elijah's got it. We got more. A couple more guys. Let's grab a pen if you don't have one. Raise your hand if you need one. Elijah's got you. So while those pens are coming around, let me tell you a little bit about what to expect in this class. If you saw the explanation of it, the little course description, it said a flood, dinosaurs, and fathers of the faith. Those are some things we're going to hit. In this class, we will tackle key apologetic questions raised in chapters 1 through 11 of Genesis as we investigate the universal flood, evolution versus creationism, God versus science, and more. We're going to do that the first 4 weeks of this class, all right? So the first 4 weeks of this class, we're going to study those topics. And this topic, the way we're doing this really is, the term is apologetics. And apologetics means to defend. And we're going to defend the Bible and defend God and provide some rational explanations for God and defending our faith as we look at these first 11 chapters of Genesis over the first 4 weeks. After we do that, then we're going to move on the last 4 weeks, and we're going to do chapters 12 through 50. Now, we can't do all of those, so we're going to pick out a few key figures like Abraham and Joseph, and we're going to study out these men and some of the women in those chapters and get inspired by their faith, their lives, how God worked through them, how God helped to redeem them when they fell in certain areas. And so that's where we're heading in this class. The goals on your sheet there, number one, is that you get a deeper understanding and appreciation of the book of Genesis, okay? So that's the first goal. Just whatever you know now, we're going to go deeper, and you're going to appreciate it more. That's the first goal. The second goal is I want to equip you to handle some of the skeptics and cynics out there in the world on a number of hot-button issues that the book of Genesis raises. How old is the earth really? Why are there no dinosaurs mentioned in the Bible? Was the flood really universal? What's up with all the long lies in Genesis, and how were people living 4, 5, 6, 7, 800, even 900 years? What's up with that? What about evolution versus creationism? Can science and religion, are they friends or enemies? So I want to equip you a bit to handle those kinds of difficult issues, okay, that are raised in studying Genesis. And then lastly, the third goal is just to be inspired by the lives of some of the great patriarchs that are in Genesis, like Abraham, like Joseph, and others. So those are our goals. And what we're going to do today, we're going to start by going all the way back. So grab your Bible, and we're going to go all the way back to Genesis 1:1. We're going to go all the way back to the beginning. And Genesis itself just means origin or beginning. And the title is taken from the very first phrase of the book. What's it say, the very first words of Genesis 1:1? What's it say? In the beginning, right? So that's what Genesis means, in the beginning or origin. And I think Genesis is fascinating. I've always been intrigued with what I would call sort of the back story. The story of how things got to be the way they are. There's been a trend the last handful of years in superhero movies, Batman, Superman, X-Men, that kind of go back to figure out where did these guys start? What's the backstory? And these stories are compelling because when you kind of go back in those stories and figure out how did they become who they were, you understand so much more about it. The newer movies make sense when you get the backstory. More recently, TV shows like Agent Carter and S.H.I.E.L.D. have helped us more fully understand Captain America or the Avengers. It's the same way with the Genesis. You kind of go back to the beginning and get the backstory. How about this? What if somebody made your beginnings movie? The story of your formation. What if you could go back and kind of see your backstory, back when it all started, the experiences, the hurts, the heroes that formed your thinking? I think if we did that, it would explain a whole lot about who you are today. And what about if you got your parents' story? Surely there's a lot of their story that influences your story, whether you like it or not, right? You know, good and bad. And what if you went back further still to trace back the roots of your family tree to your parents' parents and so on and so forth, the people, the stories, and with them the reasons that led up to who you are and even you ending up on the planet. That backstory is very important, and that's what Genesis is. For each of us, it goes back to the start, to the roots of life, to what it means to be human. And it explains a lot. So as you read through Genesis, you're going to find each one of us, ourselves, in Genesis. And hopefully you'll have a lot of like, wow, that really explains a lot about me and why life is the way it is and why I am the way I am. Because as we study our ancestors, we see these connections with how they influence even us today. So Genesis, the book of beginnings, it's the origin story for all creation. From the smallest subatomic particle to the farthest star, to you and to me. In verse 1 we read, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So there it is. That is the start of it all, except, of course, for God, right? Because God was already there. God, who has no beginning, who has no end, is the one who created everything. And in case you're wondering, for me, I believe God made it exactly as he recorded it here in Genesis, right? Not only because it's in the Bible, because also the Bible account from all my studies is really one of the most scientifically, it's the most scientifically and historically accurate book that I know. Now, you could disagree with me on that, of course, and you're free to do that. But as you take this course, if I'm going to be the one teaching you, it's always good to know where your teacher's coming from. So I just want to let you know that's where I'm coming from in this whole issue of what I believe about the Scriptures. So you always, just teens especially, always find out your teacher's point of view, whether or not you agree with it, right? So why do I believe the Bible account is true? Well, I believe it for a lot of reasons. One of them is from studying. I'm a scientist. I worked in the medical field for a number of years. I did a chemistry degree, and then I did a neuropharmacology PhD in medical school at the University of Pennsylvania. And one of the things I did my doctoral dissertation on is I studied how cells communicate inside themselves, okay, and what are called intracellular signal transduction mechanisms. That's what I did for a living. So I got a chance to study neuronal cells and how they communicate on the inside and look at these processes and look at the intricacy and look at the complexity of life and the beauty of life at this micro level, okay? And I wasn't a Christian then at all, wasn't even thinking about God at that point in my life. But all of that intricacy and complexity, it just amazed me. And when you look at it, to me, the more you look at science, the more you have to believe in God, not the less. Right? You know, because, and you'll see that as we go through this course. You know, here's one of the things, just one of the conclusions from what I've studied and from what I've observed, both in the medical research building and out. The simplest living organism has more moving parts than the most complicated machine that man has ever made. The simplest, right? The simplest cell, over 100,000 moving parts in one cell, working thousands of operations a second. I mean, the intricate workings of just the simplest living item are mind-bogglingly complex and complicated. You know, as a scientist in a former life, as someone who's had the opportunity to see things at this complex level, I stand in awe of life in any way, shape, or form that it exists. And I honestly believe it's an insult to the designer, to God, to say that a machine like that was simply an accident or just came about by chance. More than that, it's like, that's kind of absurd. Like, who in their right mind would even think that. It takes a whole lot more faith to think that than it actually does take to believe in God. As for the Bible in your handout, it's not meant to be a science book. So I want to say that up front. As for the Bible, it's not meant to be a science book. You can write that in there. And it does not answer every scientific question. It was never intended to. But as I said, I've become convinced by much compelling evidence that the Bible is scientifically and historically accurate. I'm going to have time to share some of that in this class, but not all of that, because it would be an entirely, we could spend literally months and years. But I encourage you, and I'm going to encourage you even today, with some homework that you're going to have afterwards, to come up with some of your own conclusions and start doing some of your own research on some of the topics that are raised today. So let's jump back to Genesis. So back in Genesis, the creation story moves forward very quickly from that first verse. All of creation is covered in one chapter, chapter 1. Then in chapter 2 zooms in on the creation of mankind. And the story of humanity is the focus of all of Genesis. The story of humans and their relationship with their Maker and Creator. And that relationship starts in harmony, but then, as we know, in Genesis 3, it gets severed badly. In your handout, sin enters the picture and death follows closely behind. Sin enters the picture and death follows closely behind. From there, we're going to follow man's descent into a downward spiral, and we'll look at that next week. Family is another big theme in Genesis. You can write that in, family. And sibling rivalry turns jealousy, deceits, lies, murders, and leads into appointed separation from God. Apart from God, man goes from bad to worse. And then judgment, you can write that in. Judgment becomes the next major player in the story. And that's the story of Noah and the flood, and that's a rough one. And the text of that story, when we look at that in a few weeks, we're going to see the God of both mercy and justice. The God who's brokenhearted over the world that he's made, and the God that then works very, very, very hard to save his creation. One more thing I want you to watch for as you read through Genesis, and part of the digging deeper that I want us to do is read all of Genesis during this course, and we'll split that up over the weeks. But as you're reading, and this might be the most important, through all the sin and forgiveness that you'll see in this book, through all the judgment and the salvation in this book, God is working to recreate a relationship with man, with a few individuals who will choose to walk closely with him. That's huge. And in doing so, God makes a covenant. The word covenant that's a very important word here, a covenant in Genesis. It's going to become this binding agreement between two separate beings that link them together into relationship, just like in a marriage. Covenant creates the terms that connect us and allow us to walk with, in this case, God, and allows God to be with us. So as you read Genesis, watch for that word covenant. It's God's great plan to create relationship with mankind, with you and with me. So God enters into covenant with the chosen few, and their stories are set apart from all the rest. Many humans have walked the landscape of this earth, but only a few have walked with God. One other thing about the Bible here, I think it's important to say, the Bible is not a complete or comprehensive history of every people on earth, all right? But it is for all people, all right? But it just kind of shines the spotlight on those who God first chose and those who first begin to walk with him. The fact that it's for all people is made clear from the very first promise given to man. What chapter of Genesis contains the very first promise made to man? There's one about a rainbow you're probably trying to think of. Genesis 12, we get a promise from God. When he makes the covenant, and he's going to make his descendants as numerous as the stars and as numerous as the sand, the pieces of sand on the earth. So when God makes a covenant with a man named Abram, before he changed his name to Abraham, God makes this covenant. And the heart of all that is a change. The heart of that story is Abram didn't just wake up and all of a sudden was godly. He didn't inherit this heritage of godliness. Abraham chose to walk with God. Chose to have a walk of faith. And that's another major theme we're going to see here a little bit later on in Genesis. Faith. This change. This coming to believe and choosing a new way in life and a new path in life. Very, very important. So the stories of Abraham and his descendants here in Genesis are not all clean and pretty. I think we know that. And we're going to see that once we get to Genesis chapters 12 through 50. Their faith walk is a messy one. oftentimes filled with lies, dirt, blood, deceit, and all the complex messiness that we call life. But there's also one thing additionally that their lives are full of here in Genesis, and that word is redemption. Go ahead and write that in. Redemption is taking something wrecked and ruined and giving it life again. Turning desperation to hope, turning worthless vanities into eternal glory. Redemption is the one great change God weaves into every story in the Bible. And through Abram, God made a plan to bring a Redeemer to everyone. Not to Abram itself it ends up being, but to one of his branches, way down the family line eventually, and all the way to us today. So that's how Genesis, this is how I read Genesis. It's our story. It's the backstory to these themes that are so important for us as humans, and certainly so important for us as Christians or those who are thinking about becoming Christians. So let's jump into chapter 1. Jay, let me just, in a little interlude, can you see if, I don't know where Barry is, but if there's a way to adjust the heat, it's hot in here, isn't it? Yeah. It's very hot. So, or we can just pop open the windows. Maybe a few of you on the outside, can you just dial open the windows if you're out there? Because it's just, and let's keep a couple of those doors in the back open as well, there where Jay is. Let's get a little circulation. Fan your neighbor if you need to. Fan yourself a little. Okay, we'll just take a little break. Sometimes it's just me, but I'm like, whoa. I think it's more than me. It's Karen. She's just hot. All right. All right. Thank you, everybody that's helping with that. Thank you, K-Sam. Thanks, John. If that won't open, just don't open that one, but we can open another one. All right, so let's jump back to your handout. Oh, it feels better already. I felt something up here already. Okay, thank you. So Genesis chapter 1, here we are back to the beginning of it all. Now, if you've ever been fascinated by the creative process, like maybe you're an artist, or maybe you've watched someone create art, or you've seen an inventor at work, when it comes to creative things, diving into Genesis here is about as good as it gets. The story of creation, it starts here, as we already saw here in verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So here's some building blocks. Write this in your handout. God starts out by setting some of the basic building blocks he's going to use into place. In the beginning, time. Okay? So time is a building block he's going to use. God created the heavens. So that's space. So put some space in there. And the earth. Let's just call that matter. So time, space, and matter. That's some of the initial working tools and building blocks in God's workspace as the greatest artist is about getting ready to sort of paint his canvas or begin building his creation. Verse 2, now the earth was without form and devoid. Darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. You know, light is cool. Light is a wonder. If you've ever talked to somebody who's blind and can't see, you begin to realize a little bit the blessing of having light and being able to see really is. It's one of the reasons that my dad went blind and later in life, it's one of the reasons we're raising a guide dog for the blind now, just to help somebody else through a situation that's very tough. But light is truly a wonder. Light is so gracefully simple as flipping on a light switch or looking outside when it's daylight. Yet it's complex beyond comprehension. You could talk to one of my kids, you could talk to Grant, and you could talk to your physics teacher maybe to explain photons. What are they made of? You know, how do they move? How are they formed? I mean, photons are awesome, but are they particles? Are they waves? Are they wave particles? I don't know. But they're cool, right? You know, like photons, light is just cool. And all the beauty of the physical world, and what we witness here in Colorado and the beauty here, it comes by way of light. So verse 4 goes on to say of this creation of light, it just says simply, it was good. God saw that it was good. Really understating the beauty of light, right? It's good. It was good. How was the movie? It was good. No, it was good. In many ways, light reminds me of God himself. A couple passages there. 1 John 1:5 says God is light. This is the message we have heard from him and declare to you, God is light. In him there is no darkness at all. Or in John 3:19, when Jesus entered the world, the Bible describes that event as, this is the verdict, light has come in to the world. And so it was when I became a Christian. It was as if light kind of filled the darkness of my own heart and my own mind. And suddenly, and yet kind of the most simple but yet complex way, I was able to see differently, right? Some of us who've become Christians, you know what that process is. I mean, I remember even before becoming a Christian, but studying to become a Christian, just doing the sin study and walking home after the sin study, it's as though I saw things like I never saw them before. Because the Bible illuminated the world for what it was, and the scales had fallen and begun to fall from my eyes. It goes on here to say that God separates then the light from the darkness, right? God separated the light from the darkness, verse 4 there. Separating, by the way, you can write this in, separating is a key work that God does. Both throughout the creation story and in our lives today. He continues to try to separate out the light and the dark, right? That's part of Jesus' ongoing work in our lives. Verse 5, there was evening and morning the first day. We're going to come back to this in a moment, but the word day is an important one. Especially if you've ever wondered about how old is the earth or how old is the universe. Were these days 24 hours long, or were they much longer than that? How long was a day? Biblical scholars argue about this one. People that are way smarter than you and me or anybody else in this room, right? And there's a lot of science behind it. There's a lot of study behind it. But it's definitely worth looking into, and it's a hot-button issue we're going to end with today. I'm going to give you some things to think about on that one. But moving on to day 2 in verse 6. And God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. So a synonym for expanse here would just be sky, okay? And so God said, let there be sky in the midst of the waters, so there'd be the clouds, the sky, that separate the waters from the waters down below. This is the great accomplishment of day 2. The clouds above, the oceans below, we got the sky in place. As we read through the creation story, keep in mind that God wasn't simply just poof water and poof cloud and poof sky here. It wasn't just sort of whimsical in that sense. At that same time, he's actually designing the very nature of things as well. So he's putting gravity into play. He's putting temperature into play. Evaporation, condensation, all the things that make the water cycle possible. By the way, the water cycle is amazing. Now, you probably don't think it's so super amazing. Maybe when you first learned it, and what did you learn water cycle in? 3rd grade, 5th grade, 2nd grade? You learned it pretty early on, and you had to draw all the pictures and do the whole circle thing, and wow, that's cool. But with the water, to me, we'll come back to the water cycle here in a minute, because I love the water cycle. Sometimes I like the water cycle for this reason. One of the places the Bible does talk about science is it talks about the water cycle. So look at your handout. I put 2 scriptures there in your handout that talk about the water cycle. Now, the water cycle, before we look at that, when you studied it, when was the water cycle figured out by scientists?
1800.
No.
1952.
Love it. The 16th century is the first decently documented case scientifically we have of someone describing the water cycle as we would know it today, all right? But the Bible, back in the 8th century BC, 2,400 years earlier, 2,300 years earlier, Amos 5:8 says, who calls for the waters of the sea and then pours them out over the face of the land. And still earlier in Job, some people think Job was written in the pre-patriarchal day, pre-Abraham day of 2000 BC, 2200 BC. Job 37:26, what? God draws up the drops of water, which then distill as rain into the streams. Scientists didn't know that then. Other people weren't clued into that then. But God knew it because, look, I designed it. Shoot, come on. And he revealed that to Job and to Amos and others. How about them apples, right? Speaking of apples, day 3 gives us the very first signs of life. So when we jump down to verse 11 here, God brings out the dry land from the vast seas in verse 11 this way. God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants, yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, and, in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth. And it was so. Now, this is amazing to me. Here's another one that's amazing. We take it for granted because you go to Home Depot and you buy your little packet of seeds to grow the wildflowers you want in your yard or whatever, your tomatoes or what have you. But God made the beauty, the color, the amazing complexity of the plants. He made them all out of dirt. And then inside every living plant and tree, inside just one tiny little cell, he put all that information. All that information, and compacted it into just that little seed, into those few cells, right, that are making up that seed. Seeds are incredible. Inside every tiny, unimpressive seed hides within it detailed blueprints, complete construction plans for an entire plant or flower or tree. From roots to stem to bark to leaves to fruit, it's all in there. Coded in a language more complex than any man can speak. Even the tools and machinery for construction are tucked away in there. Think about that one. Not just here's the paper blueprint, but actually the tools that you need for it. Oh, that's all in there too. Tucked away, ready to be activated and go to work. And the fact that, to me, that science and instruments allow us to see and glimpse what's going on there, again, should not reduce our awe of God, but should enhance our awe of God. Evolutionary theory is in crisis in certain ways, in two ways in your handout here. I believe, and many others have written, Darwin would never have posited his theory had he had a knowledge of molecular biology. Had he really known how complex cells were, many people don't believe that Darwin would have come up with the theory the way that he did for a natural selection and going on to be descent from a common ancestor. The two challenges, there are numerous ones to evolutionary theory. We have about 15 we're going to hit throughout this course, but two tonight. Complexity is number one. Complexity. Even the leading evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould recognizes evolution by gradual changes seems to be a pipe dream. In writing this, of what possible use are the imperfect in beginning or incipient stages of useful structures? For example, what good is half a jaw? What good is half a wing? How can half an organ provide natural selective reproductive advantage to be carried on to the next generation? What advantage would half an eye be? What advantage would half a kidney be, leaving half the impurities back in your blood still? It's a challenge. The complexity of living systems. The fact that whole groups of things would have had to evolve at the same time, simultaneously, at the right place, at the right time, all in working order, all synchronized, all the right size, shape, all to come together to make something that functions. It's just astronomically complex. In a few weeks, we're going to look at some statistical numbers about the likelihood of this happening, and you won't even get your head around it, okay? Like, it gets to the point where, like, supercomputers have a hard time coming up with the odds and the probabilities because they're so minuscule. The second challenge to evolutionary theory is that all of life is self-reproducing from the beginning. They reproduce each according to their kind. So not only are they complex, they're self-reproducing. Okay? So we haven't created yet a physical machine that replicates itself. We haven't created that. Now, some of the smartest people in the world right now are trying to do that, and it's crazy complicated. And again, the evolutionary theories were forced to simply rely on dumb luck because there's no intelligence you can put in the equation if it's all by chance. So the very first living thing had to be intricate enough to not only reproduce itself and all its parts, have all the machinery for all its parts, but then it had to recreate more of itself so it could propagate. To me, that's like saying this. A bomb was dropped on a mountain with aluminum ore in it, and out of the rubble came a working jet airplane, and the airplane, out of pure dumb luck, made baby airplanes. Okay? That's evolution, step one, right? Come on. And sometimes evolutionists say, well, if you just give it enough time, eventually it will happen. Actually, time is your enemy. One of the things that I did in working in subcellular level is we would extract RNA, ribonucleic acid, sort of a cousin of DNA, and RNA makes messenger RNA. From messenger RNA, you code proteins, right? And we were studying the expression or the levels of mRNA inside certain neuron cells. That's what we were doing. RNA is a finicky molecule to work with because there are these things here and here and here and breathing out called RNAases. It's an enzyme that breaks down RNA. Well, if you break down the thing you're trying to study, you can't study it. And one of the things I had to learn at a skill level was how to be perfectly contamination-free to work with RNA. Very difficult. If it's just out here for a split second, bam, it's gone, it falls apart. It just totally denatures, it degrades, molecules are breaking up, busting up, can't exist. So if you say, well, just give it all time, I'm like, no, you ain't got time to take the complex building blocks of life and just kind of, it's going to hang out here until 10 other thousand things that need to happen form and come along and join all together, and now we actually make something. It's gone. It was gone within the first second, let alone 10,000 years of just giving it enough time. So time is not a benefit, but sometimes you hear that. Time is the enemy of order and stability, not the generator of it. So the land was planted, and once again, verse 12, God says it was good. He's like, I like this. Maybe you built, growing up, a model airplane. Or maybe you built something of your own, and it's just kind of cool to say, man, I did this, and you kind of feel good about it. My creative spark, my skill, my imagination, and you just kind of step back at it and you admire it. You invite your friends to take a look at it, admire that, wow, that's what God, man, it's good. So then day 4 begins in verse 14. And here God fills the expanse of space with sun, stars, moon, planets, all their awesomeness. Interestingly, in verse 17, it says, and God set all these things that I just mentioned in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. Earth was the focus of all that out there. It plays a very special, literally, the earth is the focus of the entire universe. It's not in the center of it, but it's the focus of it. So cool. You have a second handout there. Go ahead and look at the one that, and I want to read through this with you here, because so much of what's designed in the physical realm, and we're going to look at some other examples in coming weeks here, is so precisely orchestrated and planned that it's blow away. One simple thing is that, it's these greater and lesser, we just said the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. That's the sun and the moon. And they help control seasons and tides and calendars. We can make calendars and plant and do agriculture all as a result of that. And they provide good time chronometers, if you will, for us to be able to do that long before cool watches and smartphones. But one of the interesting things about the unique position of the earth is that the sun is 400 times the diameter of the moon, and the sun is 400 times further away from us than the moon is. So guess where the only place that you can have a total solar eclipse is in our solar system, in our galaxy? Where's the only place? Earth. It's perfectly positioned. This precision you can look at the proton-electron ratios in the universe. Like that's something you want to do for some light bedtime reading sometime, right? We're going to look at an example of that here in a couple weeks. It's balanced to like 1 to 10 to the 37th power. And if it's slightly off, no world. It either blew up and goes way beyond and just blew into nothingness, or it contracts right back to where it began from in the beginning, where there was nothing except God. But on this handout here, just trying to take a simple example. Somebody have that second page that has an example so I can read it here for you. We're not talking about building a cell, something with hundreds of thousands of pieces with thousands of operations going on in a second. We're just going to try to spell the theory of evolution, okay? All right, so just read along with me. Imagine if we wanted to spell out that, okay, with the letters and spaces, using the evolutionary principle of chance. We might randomly draw characters from a Scrabble set consisting of 26 letters of the alphabet, plus spaces. So let's say we have 27 to draw from. The probability of getting any particular letter in our phrase using this method would be a 1 out of 27 chance, 1 over 27. The probability of getting all 23 letters and spaces in the correct order required to spell out the theory of evolution can be calculated by multiplying the probability of each individual event times itself. So 1 over 27 times 1 over 27 times 1 over 27 times 1 over 27 times 1 over 27, 23 times out. Okay? So if you're just going to randomly draw letters out and hope that they would come up, T, H, E, E, V, O, L, U, T, I, O, N, and so forth, right? And get it right, all right? The chances of you doing that, you would have to do it 1/800,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000 times before that would happen. Just to spell that, which is ridiculously simple. I think Hunter's trying to do the calculation right now, and I don't think the phone will carry that far out on it, right? That's why you can do this. Go home and do this. I did this for password strength. You can go home and type in a password, and it'll tell you how strong it is, and it'll give you like odds of people guessing it and that kind of stuff. Like if you have one letter, easy. 2, easy. 3, 4, a little more complicated. When you get out to like 7, 8, or 9, and if you start to mix numbers and letters, you start to get crazy numbers like this. So my passwords all have numbers, a mixture of capital letters and small case letters, and I go at least 8. So the odds of somebody cracking mine are in the like million, trillion, like it's way out there. Super difficult to crack. But that's just with 8 letters. You see over 23 letters how ridiculous the odds get. Just pulling it out by chance. Are we going to get something random out of that even makes sense? We can't even spell a word, yet build a machine. Yet build a machine that's complex. Yet build a machine that's complex that will build more of its machines because it has all the machinery in the machine. Right? So anyhow, you can do all these kind of mental gymnastics and math gymnastics that you want and look that up. For some of us who are like, oh my goodness, my mind is hurting. Okay, so, but here you can do this. You can do this. This is a fun one. For details and lots more information about the impeccable design of our planet, I want to recommend a book and a movie, both of which are called the same name, and that name is The Privileged Planet. The Privileged Planet. You can just YouTube it. It's on YouTube. It's about 1 hour and 20 minutes, and basically it just shows how the Earth is fine-tuned for life with just this amazing, mind-numbing, staggering precision, okay? But The Privileged Planet, check that one out. All right, continuing on here. Once again, God saw that it was good, and day 5 brings us into the creation of all the birds and the vast array of sea life in the world's oceans. God told the fish to be fruitful, and are they ever? They're super fruitful. But no time to rest yet. Day 6 brings us back to dry land and the creation of all the animals. Verse 24, God made them all out of dirt, each one according to their kinds. And that phrase is mentioned several times here, which means it's important. But that word kind essentially means species, that God made male and female creatures of each species, and then, I believe, allowed for mutations to give us then a greater variety of animals over time that we now experience today. Some of those animals that they're gone extinct, new ones have appeared, etc., etc. But I believe more that the species are what God created, and then He allowed other processes to play a part in that as He directed. But we'll do more on evolution on an upcoming lesson in this series. But let me just share this for this series. I wrote in there Neo-Darwinian evolution. And here's an explanation for what that means. It means descent from a common ancestor, with natural selection selecting the fittest survivors for perpetuating their genes to subsequent generations via selective advantage through reproduction. Okay, that's a whole lot of words, but that means basically we had a common ancestor. Over time, we kind of all descended from that. Natural selection guides the process by whoever's the fittest and the strongest and can propagate and reproduce the most and get their genes in the next generation. Those genes kind of determine where things move on, and mutations are what accomplishes that purpose. A prediction from that, then, would be that species should be continuing to change over time. Yet, what we see in the fossil record and what you observe is most species exhibit no directional or evolutionary change while they're on Earth. They're static. They appear in the fossil record all of a sudden, and then they stay in the fossil record until they disappear, looking pretty much the same the whole way through. These anatomical and structural changes are typically, when you can observe it, are small and directionless. So a bat is a bat, a rabbit is a rabbit, a cow is a cow. And so that kind of goes against what you would predict from the Darwinian evolution theory. Bats, for example, appear in the fossil record with no evidence of pre-bat ancestors. And the fossil bats, the bats that we have today, all have the same distinctive features we've seen in bats in fossils. So that kind of argues against this ongoing evolutionary push that continues to march on. It seems as though within species, things kind of stay. They appear suddenly, which also goes against slow change over time and descent. It just boom, and all something brand new appears. Kind of like God created it. That's what it said. Yeah, So now I do believe when it says God created things, we'll get to this in a minute, when it talks about days, that a day, it doesn't mean it has to be instantaneous. But I do think God can create it instantaneous. Or he could create a bat and say, okay, now we're going to let some mutations and other things kind of maybe generate some related species to that or something. He can do that. I have no problem with that. And there's nothing in the Bible literature that is any conflict with that, right? So all the creatures get set in place. God creates the most complex, then, creature, humans, as the last thing. Verse 26. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over all the creeping things that creep on earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So this is the pinnacle creation. The crown jewel, you, me. Not just a cog in the cosmic machine, not just an insect on the evolutionary chart, but the pinnacle, the crown jewel. Two essential things here. Number one, it's the image of God. We're created in the image of God. The image of God is perhaps the most important and fascinating element in all God's creation. It's almost as if God painted his signature on the painting with this one. Like he marked his work of art with a seal, his very own image. What does it really mean to be made in God's image? I don't really know, but we're going to look at it a little bit in chapter 5 next week. Human life is supreme. Human life. Lion kills, eats, it doesn't have regret, doesn't have guilt. Animals don't have rights and wrongs and ethics. We're created in God's image. And we see the dominion of man as well. There's a call for mankind to rule, not in a tyrannical way, not in an abusive way, but in a godly way, made in God's image, ruling God's way with responsibility, with righteousness, with compassion, with care. To rule over the earth and tend to the earth as a good shepherd would tend a sheep or as a farmer would tend his field. In your handout, God's good creation calls for humanity's wise stewardship. We should work the earth. We should keep the earth. We should take care of it. So all the work is done here in chapter 5. Your little chart, flip over your sheet. Little chart to fill out. On the left-hand side there's some things that God formed and then some things that God filled the earth with. So number 1, day 1, heavens, earth, and light. That goes in that first block. And then so that's heavens, earth, and light. In that next block is the expanse, the sky and water. On day 3, it's dry land and plants and trees. And then from those things that he formed, then he fills them. Day 4, sun, moon, and stars. And then day 5 are fish and birds. And then day 6 are creatures that move on land and man. And it's after this that God takes a rest, looks at it all, saw all that he made was very, very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 6th day. All right. We're going to hit one more. We're going to walk through chapter 2 here. But before we do that, a little further down on your handout, we've kind of whet your appetite a little bit with some of the things here that can happen in Genesis. What are some of your thoughts about Genesis with respect to those 2 questions that are asked there? What do you hope to get out of this course? Or is there something in Genesis that's troubled you for a while or kind of bothered you or you weren't quite sure about but you haven't taken time to dig into? But in this course, let me go ahead and take time to dig into that thing. What are some initial thoughts, maybe even something connected to any of the words or issues that we've already mentioned today that you may want to get from this course, or you may want to dig into or learn, just get more equipped in over these coming weeks? What do you think? What are some thoughts? Mm-hmm. Jim?
The question that I've had for a while is right in chapter 1, because verses 3 to 5 talk about God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. He calls the light day and the darkness night. And then it goes down to verse 14 and 15, which is the fourth day. He says, "Let there be light in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night." So it's like it talks about light on 2 different days.
Right.
And I guess I haven't ever quite really been able to figure that out.
I have a quick thought on that, and maybe we can come back to that in a minute too. Did you hear the question? So when was light formed? Was it that day or that day? Which was it? It's both. So light itself was formed in those first verses that you read, but God had not put light yet into sun, moon, stars, planets. It existed some other way, right? And with that, with the sun to rule the day and the lesser light, the moon, to rule the night, I don't think, this is one of the reasons I don't believe these are literal days. Because even before this, he says morning and evening, before there were morning and evening calendar items put in place. And so I think the answer is both. And I think we don't really begin to, it's those things provide those benefits for us on down the road. But I think to me, it's how I begin to interpret there was morning, there was evening, the first day. I don't think that's a 24-hour period. That's one of the reasons I don't think it is. But you may have a different opinion on that as we start out. But I think it's both. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, other thoughts or questions? What do you want to get out of this? Or what's something maybe you want to dig into or learn or tackle something? Mm-hmm. Dawn.
So I'd love an explanation of why, if personally you're so convinced that science and the Bible go together, why is there such controversy about that, or a disbelief, a lack of faith, that if you're a scientist or scientifically minded, that you certainly wouldn't believe the Bible? Why is that?
So maybe we can take this one up, and there's probably some here that have thoughts on that too, but I'll summarize it this way. Extreme claims on both sides. And the same could be said today of how certain issues are handled in the media. Extreme claims on both sides put people at odds who otherwise wouldn't necessarily be at odds. And so I know that's vague, but I think at the very root, that's the issue. And I think it's historic, because I think these extreme claims on both sides have existed historically for hundreds of years, and I think it's contemporary as well, and it continues to be a divide. And I think when you begin to put certain pictures of, beings growing into cavemen, growing into humans in the school textbooks, and you don't allow there to be any attempt at synchrony with Scripture because you pulled the Bible totally out, then it seems like it's either one or the other too. So I think there are false dichotomies that are created that way as well, that create an ongoing divide. So just 2 quick things, yeah.
One question I have, as I get older, my faith says, that's cool, I can handle it. But, why, you made reference to this earlier, why did the humans, they live so long, and then it just stopped? There doesn't seem to be, and God was mad, so he, God sent a man and stopped him to be able to, there doesn't seem to be, or remember anyway, a reason why we went from 900 years to, 80 years or whatever, 20, whatever. So
There's some interesting thoughts on that, both theologically and scientifically. We'll get into that probably next week or the week after. But that's a good one. That's one that just read a couple articles on that. Like if you've had that question, let me go read a couple articles. And read a couple articles on 2 sides of the fence, if there are 2 sides, and see which one resonates with you. Because on some of these things, you're going to find there's not a definitive answer. You can't definitively say yes this or no that. And you got to be okay with some of that vagary on some of these issues. And accept that it's okay. Like, what did I say earlier? The Bible is not a scientific textbook, So it's not attempting to explain all these changes and adjustments or things scientifically. So some of that we're just not going to know. But in contrast to some people who, want to discount what we can see visibly and discount science, as a scientist, I tend to embrace science to a degree that I feel comfortable with, and I'm okay with that. Whereas other people aren't okay with that because of this divide. They can't be reconciled. So as soon as you start to tell some people, well, I kind of believe science here. Whoa, no, you can't do that. God's, I'm like, well, we got to avoid the extremes. But we'll come back to that because that's a good one. Yeah, how long do people live? That's a good one to study out too.
I have two issues I always have with Genesis, and I have three theories I just land with and agree to disagree with myself. One of them is dinosaurs. Right?
Yeah.
The Bible doesn't talk about it, and I've heard two theories about it.
Let me say something before you go further. The Bible does not talk about quasars or protons either.
Right? Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm just saying. So one is, one day, when God, the first 7 days weren't actually 24-hour days, like you just said.
Okay, yeah.
They could have taken millions of years. God could have taken however much time he wanted because he got days out.
So that theory is called day-age theory. The days were ages of long periods of time. That's one theory. Yep.
Okay. And the other one, and this one's a little pretty weird, but scientific, studying tree data in the age of the earth is always changing. So people that believe this always think, how accurate it is anyway.
So if you didn't hear that, so how accurate is radiometric dating, for example? Can it be trusted? How much can it be trusted? How much variability is in it? Okay.
So then they say that the dragons in the Middle Eastern ages were actually dinosaurs. So they were around in the 1500s.
Right.
So that's one.
Right.
The
So
other
what do
one-
y'all think? So what do y'all think about dinosaurs? We'll come back to that. Dinosaurs. What is it? Were they around? I mean, was Fred Flintstone? Is that real? Come on. See, there's a buzz. There's a buzz on this one. Okay, hold on. Over here, John Kurt. John Kurt.
Well, in my study, it appears that God created everything mature. In other words, when he created man, he didn't create a zygote.
Mm-hmm.
He created a mature man. When he created the animals, they were mature. When he created the earth, it was mature, whatever a mature earth looks like. And therefore, why would it be impossible for him to just create those items in the rocks as an artist?
Yeah, so what John's saying is that some people, one of the explanations of the fossil record and age of Earth and such is, okay, scientists are telling us one thing, hey, we think these things are, based on our calculations, are millions of years old, whatever they come up with, and it belongs in the Pleistocene era, or whatever, whatever. But other people think, no, God had artistic license to create those things with what some would call an appearance of age, but he just created them that way. And wouldn't he have, as the creator, the license to do so? It's a fair question to ask, right? Yeah. Susan.
I was always wondering, is there any way that you can correlate the Big Bang theory with any in the scripture?
What do you think Big Bang? What do you think about Big Bang? Huh? I see some head shakes no, but some others yes. What? Big Bang. How's that? Possibly light. So some people have tried to take the scientific explanation, the Big Bang Theory, which basically says what? Out of nothing. Kaboom. And what's one piece of evidence for that?
The expanse of the universe.
Expanse of the universe, physicists measured as redshift, but everything's receding from us as though something blew up and it's continuing to do this. Okay. Right? So Big Bang. Could God have used, are scientists describing a creative tool God used, or is it poppycock? John Kurth.
So-
Poppycock, goofball, like senseless, goofy, dumb.
If we use science,
Yeah.
and we're just now, according to the scientists, seeing the light from the creation, and sound travels slower than light, then when is the bang gonna happen?
Yeah. So there's a good question. But this is good. One of the reasons you have the homework assignment you do this week, and we'll wrap it here. I want to be sensitive to your time. And we're going to tackle these kind of questions in the coming weeks, more and more of them. We'll get back to age and all that good stuff. This is what happens. People, ourselves included, typically have one or two pieces of ammunition in our faith barrel. Okay, our gun. And if we are sharing with someone and they kind of push back on God or push back on faith or push back on trusting the Bible, maybe we have one bullet, maybe two. But if they have one or two to push back, then we're kind of like, oh. We just kind of look at each other and they're like, okay, have a good day. And you move on. What I want you to get in this class is intrigued enough about some of these things, even get passionate about these things, even your opinion, knowing that even though your opinion may not be gospel, but you can still have a passionate opinion and have some well-reasoned thoughts and bullets in your faith weapon, in your sword, to take with you in the sword, so that you can take that conversation to the next level. Because typically those that oppose the Christians have one or two phrases or lines, and then they're empty. Their magazine's empty. You know, and so what are some of the lines that you hear that they use just to try to shut you down or shut the conversation down? Give me an example of one of those.
Bible's too simplistic.
Okay, Bible's too simplistic. Or the Bible's just written by man, you can't trust it. Okay, end of conversation. What? What do you mean you can't? Have you even read it? Well, I've never read it. Have you read one chapter of it? No, I've never read one chapter. Have you read one page? Well, I never read one page, but I know you can't. Well, then you don't know what you're talking about. You know, like, but people have these one-liner zingers. We got to be so much better equipped to be able to carry the conversation on, because not only do you want to win in the sense of your own faith, your own apologetic, being able to defend the gospel, you want to also win them over. Okay? So it's super important that we're not just this one or two bullet kind of people. We got to be equipped. You got to study something. It's good that John's been studying things for 10, 15, 20, I'll stop there, years, maybe more, right? You know? And some of us were like, man, I hear these things, I don't know, maybe that, maybe, you know. You need to get a backbone on some of these things and get some conviction and develop some strength in these things. That's what I hope you do in this class. Let's jump on, so we can just finish up chapter 2, and let's see how we can do that. If we can do that, and then we'll just put a pause in there for tonight. So Genesis chapter 2. This is what happens in this chapter. The story of God's creation backs up a bit to give us a bit closer account of that crown jewel, that pinnacle of creation that we were talking about, humans, the creation of man and women. And it's the only story in the Bible that takes place before sin enters the world and wrecks it. We get this human story here, okay? And we get a little glimpse into paradise. That's actually important. And we get an understanding of what we're made for, right? Everybody wants to know, what am I made for? What am I supposed to do in life? I mean, some of you teens are trying to figure out, gosh, in a year or two, maybe I'm graduating. Like, what am I going to do? Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I guess I'll go to college. That's what I'll do, you know. But, like, what do you really want to do in life? We got to figure that out, you know. And what are we made for? And who put it out there? And how do we figure that out? And those are some of the questions chapter 2 begins to help us with. So, with big questions, as a rule, if you want to find out answers to questions that are big, you got to go back to the beginning. You got to go back to Genesis, and that's why Genesis is so helpful. So Genesis chapter 2, verse 1. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host in them. And on the seventh day God finished his work he had done. And God rested on the seventh day. He rested from all the work he had done. So chapter 2 starts out really where we ended chapter 1. God finished his work. Took him 6 days. It was awesome. He just wrote down all that he did. So he takes the seventh day off. We call it the Sabbath. The rest was good, and he decided to share it. I'm not just going to rest. I want everybody to rest. In verse 3, it says, God took that day, the seventh day, made it holy. Holy, again, it's another one of those super important words in the Bible. That's when you go back to the beginning, you see God's putting these basic building blocks that are going to be in every other book in the Bible the rest of the way out. But holy is super important. It means set apart. You can write that in your notes. It's set apart, different from anything else. It also means whole. It means complete, not missing anything. It's kind of a tough word to grasp, but the Sabbath is a great picture of it. It's like one day a week we set apart. It's supposed to be totally different than the other ones. It's a special time to rest. And it's a time to enjoy God's fellowship, the way we enjoy time with our family members when we kind of rest and play on vacation. Kind of get that image in your head. I was talking to Frank Kim today, and he was recounting a time just taking one of his daughters and just driving up to Yellowstone, and he had a bike mishap, but that wasn't the important part of the story. The important part of the story was just the crazy, simple things they were talking about when you're not on the clock, and you're just talking, you're in fellowship with one another, you're just kind of resting, there's no agenda. That's Sabbath. That's with God, doing that with God. If you want to know more about that, check out Hebrews 4. We don't do such a good job with taking rest. I talked about that a few weeks ago in the Traveling Light series. If you missed that, go back and take a look on the one on want, weariness, and worry. There's some stuff in there about rest you can read on. But moving on, the story backs up from day 7 to 6. Let's see. Let me just jump over a few things here. Verse 7 says, Then the Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living creature. So God formed man from the dust of the ground, just like the plants and animals came before us. It is astounding to me. Just like them, we're all made of dirt and water. And yet with dirt, God designed this fantastic master plan where I get to eat the chicken, the bird eats the bug eats the leaf, which grows from the bush, which eats the dirt. Like God just kind of put that all together because we're just kind of all made out of dirt. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. We return back to that when we're done. We all share the same elements, only rearranged in the most ridiculously, spectacularly different ways. It's amazing. But it's not the elements in our bodies that make us humans or make us alive. It's because we're in the image of God. That's what connects us to heaven. And it's the breath of God that makes us a living creature. No other living thing is made, you can write this in, no other living thing is made in the image of God. No other living thing has the breath of God breathed into them. So just because we're made of the same elements, maybe as some other animals or wherever, just because we share some similarity in genetic makeup, does not at all mean we're close to being the same. We're so unique as humans. Language, concepts of justice, love, altruism, consciousness, reason, ethics, morality. How do you get that stuff to arise from inanimate matter? Breath of God. There's no other way. Go try it all you want. I mean, zap some dirt, zap some nucleic acids with lightning and water, see what you get. You're not going to get anything, okay? Only humans get the breath of life. Only humans get to rule and oversee and care for the earth. Only humans get to be at the top of the food chain. The breath of God brings life. Do you know something else that has the breath of God in it? 2 Timothy. All Scripture is God-breathed. The same breath that brought dirt to life brings the Bible to life when we read it.
That's super cool.
So, verse 9, the tree of life was in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Two important trees. First tree is awesome. And that tree was God's will for us. He wanted us to do what? It was called the what? The tree of? He wanted us to live, right? Now, I don't know how it worked. I don't know if you had to keep eating from it, to keep life going. But it was good. And when we read on in this chapter, we find three great gifts from God to man. You're going to write these in your handout here, okay? Number 1, verse 15 is work. One of the great gifts of God to man is work. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to do what to it? Work it. Keep it. That's paradise. Paradise is not the absence of work.
Oh.
And on that note, we'll end. Now, you may picture paradise as a place free of work, but, just emptiness, nothingness, no purpose, the Eden end and the new Eden, when it all gets restored in heaven, is anything but idle. You're not going to be floating around on clouds. There's going to be things to do, people to see, places to explore. without all of the garbage that holds us back today. And it would be all things you want to do.
Amen.
Right? So God gives us a work with purpose and productivity to use your skills, your talents. After the work, God gave Adam a will. He gave him a will. That's the second gift. W-I-L-L, will. Not like an inheritance, but rather it was God's directions, his intentions. Verse 16. He says it this way. God's will for Adam comes in the form of command. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, you may surely eat of every tree in the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day you eat of it you shall die. So God told Adam, don't eat the bad fruit, or rather, don't kill yourself. That's what he's saying. Don't kill yourself. But is that all there is to God's will for us? Just one big don't? I think some people think that. It's how I viewed religion. I mean, I grew up in church, going to church 3 or 4 times a week in the Methodist church for 18 years. And I viewed it as one big, here's all the things you shouldn't do. So while I was in church, I would abide by the don't do for that hour and a half, or that meeting, or that choir rehearsal, or whatever. But outside of that, it was do, baby. And I got in some do, right? You know, all the things I was doing I shouldn't have been doing, right? But I just reviewed religious folk. Man, don't drink, don't smoke. What do you do? That old Adam Ant song. For those of us older folks, we know that song. Just a goody two-shoes, right? Yeah. But verse 16, read over it carefully. It's not, we get messed up. We think God's all about don't do this, don't do that. No. The command starts with freedom. In the NIV translation, it says, you are free to eat of every tree. That's how it starts. Cynics of the Bible, skeptics don't get it. They think God is some cosmic snob barking out, don't do this, don't do that. Again, they've never read the Bible. They totally misunderstand the real God. And they and the masses buy into the false version of God that Satan is selling. God's will for us from the very outset is freedom. When we do things that God doesn't want us to do, it's not freedom. It enslaves us. In fact, Adam had so much freedom, he's free to eat from any of the amazing trees of Eden. And here's where you may ask the conundrum, if you're truly free, how can you be truly free if you can't do everything you want to do? How could Adam be truly free if he couldn't eat of that one tree he was told not to? Well, that's just it. He could do everything.
Right.
He was free to eat from any stinking one and every single one that he wanted to. He could eat the bad fruit. Now, he was told not to, and he was told the bad consequences of it, but he still had the ability. He still had the freedom to do it. In fact, Adam had the truest kind of freedom, the freedom of choice. But he also came to learn that with choice comes consequence. So God gave Adam a will. Adam was never forced to accept it. And just like all of us, we have a will to obey God. We're not forced to accept it, but we will suffer the consequences if we don't. So we have the work, the will, and then just one more. The third gift begins with the first not good in Scripture. In verse 18, then the Lord God said, it is not good that man should be alone. Everything up to this point was, it was good, 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 6 times. Then here it says, then the Lord God said, it's not good that man should be alone. I will make a helper fit for him. So the first not good thing in all creation is loneliness. Adam's alone, and no other living created creature could fill the hole. So God knocked Adam out, took one of his ribs, and from it made his greatest gift to Adam, the cure for his loneliness, a reason to work, and a suitable helper. God gave Adam a woman. That's the third gift, woman. Now, wives or future wives, some of you young ladies here don't misunderstand this. God did not give the woman to Adam as one gives an object or a toy. She's actually the greatest blessing for Adam. Never underestimate the great honor, ladies. Never underestimate the great honor and privilege that it is to be God's blessing to another person. That's where meaning and purpose come from. In fact, that's really true of all of us. We're made for God. We're made for others. If you want to dig in further on some of this marriage stuff, just listen to some of the lessons from the marriage class that's going on in the next room over, and you can get some more and learn more about it. But the chapter ends on a beautiful note, and that's where we'll end. And again, this week you're going to want to read chapters 1 through 5. But as you're reading chapter 2, you'll see bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. Adam and Eve become physically, emotionally close. He leaves one situation. They enter into a new arrangement, a new, living arrangement, united with her now, only with her. They become one in sex. They become one flesh. that happens in marriage when you're united to one other person in its proper context and plan. But God's creation of man and woman closes up in a very heavenly place, because the last words of the chapter summarize it beautifully. It says, "The two were naked and they were not ashamed." And I think when I think of that, I think of little kids, like little, running around a fountain in August, totally naked, and they have no clue they're running around totally naked. You know what I mean? Like they're just, I mean, we're kind of like, oh gosh, put a diaper on that kid, you know, already. Come on, I don't need to see that, right? And, but just they're like, no shame. They're just running, woo, you know, go for it, right? But just think about that for a minute here. You know, as we're wrapping up, I mean, what it means to live with no need for shame. Think about this.
Awesome.
No embarrassment because I didn't know the answer to that test or when I raised my hand in class. No shame because of a decision you regret. No shame because of a choice that you made you wish you hadn't. No shame for the things you did that you're embarrassed, that could be embarrassed about. What an amazing place to be. No shame. No sense that you ever need to cover or pretend. Simply content with who you are, how you behave, what you've done. And that's the life God intended for us from the beginning. And it's the life that God has for us in Jesus. He wants us, making us Christians, or those thinking about becoming Christian, He wants to bring us back to a place where we'll never be ashamed again. And in Christ we are that. We're made whole and pure and righteous. And it's only Jesus that can bring us back, kind of that backstory, but bring us back to what the original life God had really intended for us. So that's Genesis overview. That's Genesis chapter 1, Genesis chapter 2. We hit a little bit about age of earth. We just touched on it about are they 24-hour days. We'll pick that one up next week. What are we, about 8:15? Yeah, right on 8:15 here. Some other ideas in your, what I want you to do, it says moving forward. That's what I want you to do this week. Read Genesis 1 through 5. And then under Dare to Study, I want you to choose a topic connected to any issue that came up today. All right? Maybe it was the flood, the dinosaurs, how long's a day, apes, evolution, you know, can one couple propagate the whole earth? Like, how's that happen? Is that even mathematically possible? Why did people live so long? Greg's question, whatever. Anything else we talked about. Pick one question, study it out, and I want you to write a one-page or 4-paragraph, 1-page summary, just to some of your tidbits there. And when we come together next week, we're going to bring that, you're going to sit down and you're going to talk to somebody else about what you came up with. Just share your thoughts. It doesn't have to be fully reasoned and totally complete at that point. But that thing to put some more weapons into your,
Awesome.
like we were discussing, right? Okay, so that's what I want us to do. Don't stress about it. Just read a little. I mean, you will go home tonight, you're going to hop on Facebook for 15 minutes or 30 minutes. And tomorrow morning, you're going to check CNN first thing in the morning. What happened overnight? What's the latest in the Orlando thing? If they figured out a motive for this guy that shot people. And you'll be on that for 20. You're going to listen to the radio. I mean, even I can point out time, a couple hours just in the next half day, where you could just do this and be done. That's all it takes. That's all I'm saying. Just 5 minutes here, 10 minutes here. Read this article, grab that, look at it, do a wiki thing, check that, you know. It's really easy to find stuff on this. And you'll find stuff that's wacky. You'll find some stuff you'll be like, how in the what are they talking about? Good, put that in there too. You know, you got to learn to discern good from bad dialogue that's out. You got to do that in class anyway, teens. You know, if you want to write a coherent paper, it's going to get a good grade. But we're not writing a 10-page paper. 1 page. Pick a topic. And then we'll begin with that next week, and then we're going to come back to Jay's dinosaur question next week. We're going to hit that a little bit harder. We're going to hit age of earth. We're going to start with that, your paper and those things, and then we're going to jump into Genesis 3, 4, and 5. All right? So that's next week. Any questions? Awesome. You guys are great. See you back.